I was standing in my parents' kitchen when my father slid a folder across the table and told me to sign it. No warning, no conversation beforehand, just paper, already filled out, already decided. My mother stood beside him, nodding like this was normal. My sister didn't say a word. She didn't have to. They spoke calmly, like they were helping me, like they had the right. That was when I realized something important had already been settled without me. Not by accident, not in confusion. My name is Noah Bennett, and in that quiet moment, I understood this wasn't the end of anything. It was the point where consequences quietly began.
It was about control. Before I go on, I need to say this quietly. If you've ever been pressured by your family to give up what was rightfully yours, stay with me. You'll understand this story. I didn't always know I was the one expected to bend. It took years to see it clearly. Back then, it just felt like the air in our house moved differently depending on who needed it. Birthdays were the first lesson. Lily's birthdays were planned weeks in advance. Balloons tied to the mailbox. A theme. Friends from school. My birthdays were smaller. A grocery store cake. A quick song after dinner. "You're easy," my mum Carol would say, smiling like it was a compliment. Lily needs more attention. I learned early that being low maintenance meant being invisible. The bike was the second lesson. I saved all summer. Mowed lawns, washed cars. I kept the cash in an envelope in my desk drawer and counted it every night. When I finally had enough, Dad took me to the store. I picked a basic bike. Nothing flashy. I remember how proud I felt riding it home. That same afternoon, Lily decided she wanted one too. She hadn't saved. She hadn't planned. Dad bought her a better one. More gears. Brighter paint. "Don't keep score," he told me, laughing. I didn't answer. I just watched Lily ride past me, smiling like the world had always worked that way. At school, I was the kid who showed up early and stayed late. I practiced lines until they stuck. At my middle school play, I stood backstage and scanned the crowd. Empty seats where my parents should have been. I did my scene anyway. When I came off stage, they were there, apologizing about traffic. Lily's recitals never had traffic. By high school, I stopped bringing my achievements home like they were news. When I got into a Harvard summer program, I mentioned it at dinner like it was nothing. Dad barely looked up. "That's nice," he said, "but real life costs money." Lily spilled her drink, and everyone jumped up to help her. My grandfather Arthur looked at me from across the table. He didn't say anything, but he remembered. The airport ride was another quiet lesson. I had a scholarship interview out of state, early flight. I asked if someone could drive me. They couldn't. Lily had a recital rehearsal. I took a ride share and watched our house shrink in the rearview mirror. I didn't feel angry. I felt smaller. When the scholarship finally came through, it was treated like good news. Not great news. A nod. A good job. That weekend, Lily was praised for keeping a part-time shift at the coffee shop. They ordered takeout to celebrate her progress. I learned then that effort was measured differently in our house. My grandfather Arthur was the exception. He ran to his garage like a ledger. Everything labelled, everything accounted for. When I helped him sort envelopes, he taught me how fairness worked. "Fair isn't about who needs more," he said. "It's about doing the same thing every time." The night he was in the hospital, machines humming softly. He asked if I'd bought a house yet. I told him I had. At 27. "Good," he said, squeezing my hand. "A roof no one can take." At the time, I thought it was pride. Later, I understood it was a warning. Near the end, there was a night that changed how I understood everything that came before it. Visiting hours were almost over. The hallway lights were dimmed. The floor smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. I stepped out to take a call and heard my father's voice through a door that hadn't fully closed. Richard sounded tired but focused. Not emotional, focused. The way he gets when he's already decided how something should go. He was talking to my grandfather Arthur about keeping things simple and making sure Lily isn't left struggling. He said it like it was practical, like it was kind. Arthur's voice came back thin, but sharp. Equal means equal. He said, "Stop asking." I stood there longer than I should have. Long enough to hear the silence that followed. Long enough to understand my dad wasn't asking out of concern. He was negotiating. After the funeral, my grandmother Margaret asked me to come by her house. She moved slower than she used to, but her eyes were still sharp. The house smelled like old wood and lemon cleaner. She poured tea and didn't rush the conversation. Your grandfather hated scenes. She said he believed quiet work mattered more. Then she looked at me and added, "If anyone pushes you to move fast, that's your warning." A few days later, my Aunt Janet found me in the garage, sorting boxes my grandfather had kept but never displayed. In one of them was a scrapbook, thick, uneven, built over decades. Photos, notes, receipts. Tucked between the pages were short letters in Arthur's handwriting. Clear, direct, all grandchildren receive equal shares. Janet didn't dramatize it. She just said, he was very clear about this. By then, my parents were calling more often. Not to ask how I was holding up, to ask when I'd be ready to sign, ready to help, ready to stop making things difficult. Lily stayed quiet, but I could feel her watching, waiting. At dinner one night, she finally said it out loud. "You really think you deserve the same as me for what no one corrected her? No one told her to stop." That told me everything I needed to know. I took a day off work and sat in a diner near the bank. A cracked vinyl booth, coffee I didn't need. That's where I met Daniel Brooks, the bank rep. He chose his words carefully. "There's been some activity," he said. "Inquiries that don't line up. From me, no, on my way home. Mrs. Caldwell waved me over from a porch across the street from my grandfather's old house. She said she'd seen my dad coming by often near the end, staying late, leaving with folders. It didn't look like visiting. She said, it looked like business." I drove home with the windows down, air cutting across my face, thinking about envelopes and ledgers and the way my grandfather used to say fairness didn't need defending. It just needed protecting. That was when I stopped wondering if this was a misunderstanding and started preparing for what came next. The pressure didn't arrive all at once. It crept in, polite and steady, disguised as concern. A text here, a call there, always calm, always urgent underneath. My father asked me back to the house a few nights later. Same kitchen, same hum from the vents. The overhead light flickered once before settling. My mother had already set papers on the table like placemats. Lily stayed near the basement stairs, 1 foot on the step, 1 foot in the room, listening without committing. "This doesn't need to get complicated," Richard said. He didn't sit. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, like this was a meeting he planned to run. He slid a document toward me. "It's just an assignment. Temporary. Let us move things where they need to go." I picked it up and read slowly. I work with financial documents every day. I know when words are chosen carefully. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't administrative. This transferred my interest. "Clean, final. You're asking me to give up my share," I said. My mother reached for my wrist. Her hand was warm, familiar. "You don't need it like Lily does," she said softly. "You're already stable. She's still trying to find her footing." Lily didn't look at me. She stared at the floor, twisting the edge of her sleeve, letting them speak for her. "I'm not signing this," I said. The room tightened. Not loudly. Just enough. My father exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said. "Your grandfather wouldn't want conflict over money." That was the first time he used Arthur's name, like leverage. It landed wrong. I folded the paper once and set it back on the table. "Send it to my attorney," I said. The word attorney changed everything. Lily looked up. My mother pulled her hand back. My father's expression didn't shift much, but I saw something recalculating behind his eyes. The next morning, My phone buzzed while I was at work. A bank alert. Routine on the surface. An inquiry tied to estate-linked accounts. I stepped into an empty conference room and called the number on the back of my card. Daniel Brooks answered after 2 rings. "There's been interest," he said carefully. "Questions about timing, distribution." From me, I asked. "No," he said. He didn't add anything else. He didn't need to. That afternoon, I sat across from Erin Wallace in her office. The room smelled faintly of coffee and paper. She read the assignment document once, then looked at me. "This is a waiver dressed up as help," she said. "They're rushing you because they don't have full authority." "Who does?" I asked. She tapped her pen once. "Not your father, not by himself." On my way home, I stopped by my grandmother Margaret's place. She was already expecting me. Tea was poured before I sat down. "He tried this with your grandfather," she said. Matter of fact. It didn't work then either. Driving home through falling leaves, headlights catching orange and brown against the road, I understood something had shifted. They weren't asking anymore. They were testing how far they could push before I gave in. And I wasn't sure yet how they'd react when they realized I wouldn't, after I refused to sign. The warmth drained out of the house, not all at once. It thinned. My mother called twice the next day, once to ask if I was eating, once to remind me Thanksgiving was coming and families shouldn't be divided over paperwork. The same sentence, delivered 2 different ways. Lily texted that night, "No greeting, no softening. You really think you deserve the same as me?" For what I stared at the message longer than I should have. It wasn't new. It had just never been said out loud before. I didn't answer. The next morning, Daniel Brooks called me back. He didn't leave a voicemail. Just asked me to return the call when I had a moment. When I did, his tone was careful. There had been more inquiries, hypothetical questions, timing scenarios, all framed like efficiency. None of them came from me. "Is that allowed?" I asked. "Only with full consent," he said, "from everyone." He paused there, on purpose. That afternoon, I drove past my grandfather's old house. Mrs. Caldwell was out front, sweeping leaves from her porch. She waved me over like she'd been waiting. She told me my father had been coming by a lot near the end, staying late, carrying folders. It didn't look like visiting, she said. It looked like business. She leaned closer. "Your grandfather looked tired those days. Not confused, just worn down." I went straight to Aunt Janet's after that. She didn't ask why I was there. She pulled the scrapbook from a shelf like it had been sitting out. Inside were photos and notes and letters in my grandfather's handwriting. Short, clear, repeated in different ways. Equal shares for all grandchildren. One letter was notarized, addressed to my grandmother. A warning against pressure when he was sick. When I got home that night, my father was waiting in my driveway, hands in his pockets, a calm smile. He said we needed to talk man to man, that I was embarrassing the family, that people would start asking questions if I kept pushing. I told him all communication would go through my attorney. He studied me for a long moment, not angry, calculating. "Think carefully," he said. "This doesn't end well for people who make trouble." I went inside and locked the door, sat at my kitchen table. The house was quiet. My own HVAC hummed now. Different sounds, different rules. I laid out the notes I'd taken, the letters, the times, the names. That was when I stopped thinking of this as a disagreement and started seeing it for what it was. A strategy. And strategies have counters. I didn't know exactly how this would end yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't walking into Thanksgiving the way they expected. The law office felt colder than it needed to be. Not uncomfortable, just deliberate. The kind of cold that keeps people alert. The air conditioning hummed overhead. A clock on the wall ticked loud enough to notice. Paper shuffled as we took our seats. I sat on one side of the conference table by myself. My father, Richard, sat across from me with my mother, Carol, close enough that their shoulders touched. Lily took the chair beside them, angled slightly toward Dad. Uncle Paul sat at the far end, hands folded, already reading the room. Erin Wallace took the seat next to me. A box of tissues sat in the centre of the table, unopened. Richard spoke first. He always did. "This is all unnecessary," he said. Calm, practiced. Noah's upset. That's understandable. But we're talking about family intentions here, not technicalities. Erin didn't respond right away. She waited until he finished. Then she slid a single page into the middle of the table. "This is the will," she said. "It's not ambiguous." Richard smiled thinly. "That's your interpretation. It's also the court's." She replied. She turned the page. "There's a no contest clause. Any attempt to pressure, misrepresent, or redirect distributions risks forfeiting the offender's share." The ticking clock seemed louder. My mother's hand tightened around her purse strap. Lily stopped tapping her foot. "I'm the executor," Richard said. "You're a co-executor," Erin replied. Without looking at him, with Paul. Uncle Paul cleared his throat. "That's correct, for the first time." Richard's expression slipped, just slightly. Erin placed another document on the table. Bank logs, dates, times, inquiries that didn't align with authority. Then a notarized letter addressed to my grandmother. Margaret, written in my grandfather Arthur's hand. Clear, direct, warning against pressure while he was ill. Richard reached for it. Erin raised one finger. "Don't," she said. I felt my chest tighten, then settle. When I spoke, my voice didn't shake. "I'm not signing anything," I said. "I'm taking what my grandfather left me. No more, no less." Lily looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "So that's it," she said. "That's it," I answered. Silence filled the room. The air vent pushed cold air down our backs. Uncle Paul nodded once. "We proceed as written," he said. Erin outlined next steps. Formal notices. Written communication only. No more family meetings disguised as negotiations. When the meeting ended, I stood up slowly. I didn't argue. I didn't apologize. I picked up my coat and walked out into the hallway. The sound of my footsteps steady against the tile. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. I hadn't broken the family. I'd just stopped letting it break me. I didn't feel relieved after the meeting. Relief comes and goes. What I felt was clarity, and clarity stays. My mother tried to talk to me in the parking lot. She said we shouldn't let lawyers tear the family apart. I told her, quietly, that lawyers don't tear families apart. Secrets do. She looked at me like she'd never heard it said that way before. That night, I went home and opened my laptop at the kitchen table. The house was silent, except for the soft hum of my own HVAC. I laid everything out. Notes from meetings, dates, times, copies of letters, bank alerts. I didn't rush. I organized. That's how my grandfather worked. Fairness lived in details, not emotions. My father sent one message later that evening. Short, careful. He said he hoped I'd cool off and remember who raised me. I read it once. Then again. I didn't respond. For the first time, I wasn't interested in explaining myself. They thought they'd cut me out for good. All they really did was give me permission to stop protecting them. I met with Erin Wallace again the next day. We talked about timelines, documentation. What happens when an executor forgets his role isn't ownership. She didn't promise outcomes. She promised a process. That mattered more. Thanksgiving was still on the calendar. No one had cancelled anything. I knew why. My father hated losing face. He liked rooms with witnesses. He liked telling his version of events where everyone could hear it. I let him believe I'd show up quietly. I let the silence do its work. I wasn't planning a confrontation. I wasn't planning a speech. I was planning to stand exactly where the truth could reach the room without my help. Some doors don't close with a slam. They stay open until you walk back through them with your eyes open, knowing exactly what's on the other side. The days after the meeting were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, just quiet. I spent one evening alone in my living room with the lights low, listening to the hum of my own HVAC. No calls, No messages. No one asked me to explain myself. The silence felt unfamiliar, like a room I hadn't been allowed to enter before. I sat there and let it be awkward. A few days later, I drove past my grandfather Arthur's old place. The garage door was still the same faded blue. I parked across the street and didn't get out right away. The air smelled like damp leaves and cold concrete. This was where he taught me how to stack envelopes, how to label things clearly, how to keep emotion out of decisions that mattered. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. Standing there was enough. My grandmother Margaret invited me over that weekend. She moved slower than she used to, but her mind was sharp. She handed me a small envelope from a drawer without saying anything. Inside was a single label from Arthur's handwriting. One word, equal. I held it longer than I meant to. She watched me with the look that said she'd been waiting for this moment. "You're not imagining it," she said. "You never were." I ran into Uncle Paul in the church parking lot the following Sunday. We didn't hug. We didn't make it heavy. He asked if I was holding up. I told him I was managing. He nodded once. "Your grandfather would have respected how you handled it," he said then, more quietly. "That doesn't mean it won't still hurt." He was right. The practical work continued. I set up monitoring on every account tied to my name. I routed all communication through Erin. I stopped answering family messages that came without respect. It wasn't dramatic. It was administrative, and for the first time, that felt like control one morning. I made coffee and drank it while it was still hot. Sunlight came through the blinds and landed on the counter. I realized something then. My parents might never see me as equal. Lily might always believe she deserved more, but Arthur did. And now, so did I. A new message sat unread on my phone. Another family update. Another attempt to smooth things over before the holiday. I didn't open it right away. I wasn't avoiding it. I was choosing my timing. Some truths don't bring closure. They bring clarity. And clarity, I've learned, is a kind of peace you earn by standing still when everything in you wants to give in. If this story stayed with you, it's probably because you've lived some version of it. The quiet pressure, the expectation that you'll give more because you always have. If that sounds familiar, tell me where you're listening from. I read every comment, and if you want more stories about family, fairness, and what happens when quiet people stop carrying the weight alone, stay close. Sometimes the most important boundary is the one you finally keep.